I've been trying to work on this video debunking some core tradcon assumptions for a while now. The biggest problem I have is trying to understand what tradcons actually believe. In spite of their dishonesty, I've managed to flesh out some core assumptions and beliefs that they have amongst the miasma of their contradictory bullshit. No matter what evidence you provide to illustrate how the Industrial Revolution destroyed traditionalism, tradcons will always insist that traditionalism was and still is a superior social system that can function under any political economic arrangement. In their eyes, it is some sort of superior lifestyle choice based on eternal Platonic truths and principles of nature and the universe. In their understanding, there's a harmonious social order that mimics the harmonious order of nature. Their fundamental flaw is that they believe human relations with each other and other life forms are harmonious, and that we have a special place and destiny in the universe. They know that life is full of predation, but they believe predation and harmony can coexist. They confuse food chains with dominance hierarchies. Somehow nature is this entity with a logic, and predation and competition are just part of the plan. Human exploitation and predation are good, provided that it's done in the so-called right way to allow the so-called fittest to rise to the top. Where tradcons are theists, they believe God made man in his own image and that humans are the center of the universe. Where tradcons are atheists, they believe humans are the pinnacle of evolution and a certain type of competition and social dominance is necessary to keep the human race genetically fit and moving forward. In their eyes, humans are on top of the food chain because we built civilization or because of God for religious reasons. In their eyes, social dominance amongst humans is a sum-zero game with losers and winners because they conflate social dominance within a species with animals devouring and eating each other. Tradcons place their particular values above what they call materialist cultural Marxism, only so that they can rationalize the type of dominance hierarchy that allows for mate guarding. Even if tradcons are okay with modernity, i.e. modern industrial capitalism, they want to get rid of all welfare while subsidizing the nuclear family, no matter what the results are to society at large. Why? Because they are fundamentally anti-male. All they care about is the ability of the so-called right kind of men to hoard their resources and women from the vast majority of other men. In fact, the vast majority of tradcons are happy with modern industrial capitalism, provided the pre-capitalist values are kept intact. Like left-wingers, right-wingers share this common delusion that culture just springs out of thin air. They overstate the importance that culture plays in shaping society. They assign negative and positive values to culture without understanding that culture is just a function, it's just a functional adaptation to a particular environment and economic arrangement. Their core fallacy is that society hundreds of years ago was less of a social construct. They claim that traditionalism was a natural hierarchy, while feminism is a Marxist social constructivist ideology designed from scratch. They criticize all forms of egalitarianism for going against nature. They've even criticized MGTOW for being just like the feminists for wanting equality. The biggest problem is that once you are fighting against egalitarianism, you're not fighting for men's rights or anything at all. You are just fighting against obscure ideologies of no relevance and bizarre conspiracies. The closest thing they can say they are for is so-called natural law, which is a ridiculously vague and reductionist idea that has no understanding of nature, humans, or law. Like feminists, traditionalists have no understanding of nature, biology, or evolution. Humans have lived in various types and sizes of social organizations within radically different environments and climates going back hundreds of thousands of years. As a species, we are extremely opportunistic, experimental, and adaptive. The only thing we can say is a natural order to human beings is that we are highly social, and that as our groups get larger, they become more organized, specialized, and stratified. We not only work, live, and raise families together, we exchange goods, services, and ideas over great distances and time. We plan our futures together and study our collective pasts so that we can learn collectively across generations. We are the supreme collectivists of the animal kingdom. The irony is that while tradcons know nothing of nature, they repeatedly make the appeal to nature fallacy. They criticize egalitarianism for being unnatural. While there is no equality in nature, it is not a rigid hierarchy with inflexible roles either. Most animals display a wide range of behaviors and are quite flexible and adaptive, to the point of being able to live within unique ecosystems that humans themselves have created. Pigeons, rats, and raccoons thrive in human communities without even being domesticated. Brown bears on the island of Hokkaido, Japan, have become complete herbivores in response to human overhunting and fishing, and the fact that the island has an unusually large variety of vegetation. The fact that we have civilization proves how incredibly adaptive and flexible we are. We have no fur, and yet we can be found on all 7 continents. Our social nature and collectivist mindset is what helped us to adapt. No animal creates social structures as complex as us human beings. Civilization is itself a social construct that has only been around for 5,000, maybe a little longer, but around 5,000 years out of our very long history. Trying to apply some sort of natural hierarchy to a complex society, such as a post-industrial capitalist one, is impossible. Right-wingers have a long history of using pseudoscience to advance their socially regressive agenda. They refuse to acknowledge the role that technology played in the development of capitalism. Applying the traditional gender roles to a post-industrial capitalist society is impossible. Yes, humans are still sexually dimorphic, but the gender roles of the past are too rigid to be applied to today's society. Women were in the workforce long before welfare and affirmative action were mandated by law. While gender differences are natural, the specific gender roles that existed in the past were just one particular manifestation of gender differences that happened to be codified by society. Just because they existed in the past doesn't mean they were natural. Just because something is natural doesn't mean it is virtuous or meritocratic. People had the customs they had in the past because they were necessary for survival or optimal for their collective well-being. The problem with right-wingers is their ideas don't explain anything. They are all just moral justifications for the status quo. They offer no solutions, but rather just blame. All they can do is scapegoat leftists, minorities, and obscure conspiracies for their own personal and political failures. Their appeal to nature falls flat on its face once you realize nature is not that ordered, and it's not even a meritocracy. Nature is in constant flux. There are no roles. They're just evolutionary niches. Nature doesn't have a plan or purpose. It is not efficient, and its evolutionary trajectory is not linear. The Earth has repeatedly suffered cataclysmic change due to comets, glaciers, volcanoes, and seismic activity. It's only because we live such short lifespans relative to geologic change time frames that nature appears to us to be stable. Nature just is. Their conflation of food chains with social dominance hierarchies is most irksome and problematic for me. Dominance hierarchies are not based around consumption or even necessarily violence. When violence is involved, it is highly ritualistic most of the time. Dominance hierarchies are extremely fluid, with leaders being usually the oldest, most experienced, and most influential. Often, leaders of packs or troops have to prove themselves to the pack and curry some sort of favor, and only lead at the behest of the pack. Even food chains are relatively flat and dynamic. Animals consume whatever they can and migrate and adapt to the environment that they are in. Animals at the top of the food chain are not superior. They are in fact actually the most susceptible to climate change and ecological catastrophes. It is the smallest life forms at the bottom of the food chain, such as bacteria and insects, that are greatest in number today and that have been around for billions of years. Ironically, small life forms such as insects and bacteria are oftentimes the most venomous and deadly, and have even been known to prey on organisms much larger than them. When one takes into account the fact that 99% of all life forms that have ever existed are extinct, it is impossible to say that there are any superior life forms. All life forms, aside from plants that steal the energy from the sun and nutrition from the ground, are trying to consume and steal other life forms' star energy and nutrition. All life is feeding off of other life. There's no perfect symbiosis or reciprocity in nature. Life is constantly adapting to new niches. Nature is full of parasitism, disease, decay, mutations, cancer, and extinction. Humans are a part of this process. We are not superior. We are only here because the end of the Ice Age spelt disaster for many large mammals, creating a vacuum that we filled. In fact, we almost went extinct, and we are the only remaining species of Homo sapiens alive today. For example, Neanderthal went extinct. There was a bunch of other human-like species that no longer exist. Aside from our intelligence and social nature, we really don't have a lot going for us. We are relatively weak, slow, lacking in natural weapons and armor, and we have no fur. We have only been able to dominate the planet in the last 5,000 years. At one point, there were less humans alive than there are chimpanzees alive today. When it comes to sexual selection, tradcons are even more ignorant, if that is possible to believe. Hypergamy is not rational or conscious. Females are not choosing the best genetic material for mates. They are just choosing the mates that are most useful to them at that particular time. They are not choosing necessarily a fixed set of observable traits. Male utility can take on many forms. In fact, there's no such thing as superior genetics. There's just adaptive traits to the environment. If there were such a thing as superior genetics, evolution wouldn't occur. Life forms wouldn't go extinct, as clearly there had been the genetics involved had been suitable for a particular environment at some particular time. You also wouldn't see life forms like bacteria, fungi, and insects still on the planet, as more complex life forms would have eradicated them or would have taken over their niches. Sexual selection, like evolution, is highly imperfect. There are plenty of species that went extinct due to sexual selection, as the traits being desired for by females were not necessarily advantageous to the species as a whole. This phenomenon, known as Fisherian runaway, has been documented in species such as the Irish elk that are now extinct. Male elk had large antlers to attract female mates. When the Ice Age receded and conditions changed, males could not find enough food to meet the nutritional requirements needed to maintain their body mass and antlers. In the case of human beings, for example, our female ancestors were not consciously choosing the best genetic material in order to further some sort of evolutionary process. They chose mates that had resources and were useful in some way in that particular moment. It just so happened that the mates our ancestors chose were that on the aggregate, the qualities they chose were for intelligence, yet at the same time, ironically, also they chose weaker bodies. There's no group of men that deserve female mates more than any other group of men. Mate guarding is just as imperfect as any other evolutionary process. Cheating is found throughout the animal kingdom, and as I've said before, the dominance hierarchy that determines which males have the most access to resources and females is highly dynamic anyway. Trying to keep traditional marriage alive, either for social stability or the genetic benefit of the human race, is ultimately unproductive. Traditional marriage served a social function in our pre-industrial past, but it is now all but useless. Arguing that traditionalism or traditional marriage is natural is even more bogus, as the monogamous marriage we know of today only came into existence in early medieval Europe. Marriage, in any sense, was unknown to our Paleolithic tribal ancestors, who didn't even have property to hand down and who didn't even know who their children were. Traditionalism is neither natural nor is it meritocratic. Nature itself isn't a meritocracy. The irony of tradcons calling feminism Marxist collectivism is that traditionalism itself was highly collectivist and only existed with laws and social sanctions. There was nothing natural or individualistic about it. Traditionalism only existed as a means of enabling our survival in an agricultural, political, economic environment. It was a highly complex social system not found anywhere else in the animal kingdom. It didn't have any inherent merit or virtue. It was just a means of survival. Industrial capitalism provided men and women alike with more options and removed the necessity of rigid gender roles. Many will argue that traditionalism provided men and women with purpose and moral boundaries. The bottom line is life is fundamentally amoral and without purpose. The universe does not care whether we as a species go extinct. Humans have always created their own morality and purpose as a means for their group survival. It never came from anywhere outside of us. Even the concept of our rights came about as a means to provide social stability and incentives so as to benefit the group. It never came from the heavens or nature. It came from some collective consensus and agreement. Where we go from here is another question. Just because traditionalism worked in the past doesn't mean it will continue to work under our current conditions of modern industrial capitalism. More to the point, it wasn't natural, it wasn't virtuous, and it wasn't meritocratic, and it certainly wasn't pro-male. Capitalism tore apart the social structure of traditionalism. Capitalism didn't create misandry or gynocentrism, but it amplified it. It abolished the necessity of the sexes to depend on each other for survival, and it replaced it with desire, which placed men at a great disadvantage. Simply put, women do not desire men in the same way that men desire women. Traditionalism is dead, and there's no going back. All we as men can do is look forward with the interests of men in mind. Society as a collective already has and always has had women's interests in mind. What men need to do is to make sure that the collective looks out just as much for men. And when and where it doesn't, men must act collectively and decisively to make sure that it does. Male collectivism is the only solution.